Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. In this video, what we are going to be talking about is Git and GitHub. And it's going to be very beginner friendly, and it's going to encompass quite a lot of things, and I have a lot of diagrams to really explain how to utilize Git and how Git is actually working. So hopefully this gets you very excited. Now, one thing that I want to quickly note is what you are going to be learning in this video. In this video, I'm going to explain the basics of Git, so things like git commit, git add, git status, pushing a Git repository to GitHub. I will not be discussing things like branching and collaborative Git. That is going to be its own separate video. So don't worry, I will have it there, and I'll probably have the link in the description once I create it. So if you're looking to learn about branches and stashing and collaborating and merging, that is going to be a separate video. This is just an introductory course that is going to cover quite a bit. By all means, is it going to be a light course? I'm going to cover quite a lot of things about Git and GitHub, but again, it's not going to include some of the other more complicated Git aspects. So let's just actually talk about what we are going to be covering. So the first thing that we are going to cover is what exactly is Git. So we're going to talk about what Git is in great detail. I have a lot of good diagrams that I have worked really hard on to really encompass this point. And then we're going to talk about Git Init. This is a very special Git command. We're going to talk about quite a bit of Git commands, but this is how we can initialize a Git repository. And then we're going to talk about committing. Again, you don't have to know any of this right now. By the end of the video, I assume you will be very knowledgeable about this stuff, but there's a very important concept in Git known as committing. So we're going to talk about that in great detail. And then we're going to talk about Git Ignore. And then we lastly are going to talk about GitHub. Now, Git and GitHub are different, and I'll talk about that in future sections, but that is what we will encompass in this crash course. So hopefully you guys enjoy the ride. I really put in a lot of time with this crash course because Git has always been a very confusing topic for me when I was first trying to learn it. So I'm trying to make this as easy of an experience as for you guys to learn it. So I'll see you guys in the future sections. To begin this crash course, we are going to dive into what Git is and what problems does it solve. Later on in the crash course, we'll talk about GitHub. Don't worry about that. So let's talk about Git. What is Git? Well, Git is known as a version control system. And what it does is it allows us to track our changes within a file, and it allows us to hop around between versions. So let's go through an example so I can illustrate the importance of Git and what it does. So let's say that I am writing a paper. So I'm writing a paper, as you can see here, the title says, the most important things to learn as a developer. And I have my first sentence: as a new web developer, you must first begin with JavaScript. And then, I stop, and then I come back, and I'm like, you know what? I got to change this up a little bit. And so what I add is, okay, you got to begin with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So I add that the green part is the stuff that I added. So HTML, CSS, and the and sign. And then I end up with something like this. And then, I leave. And then I come back and I'm like, okay, I want to adjust this some more. You should just begin with HTML and CSS. So you can see here that I added the and the red is the stuff that I removed. And so now I have something like this. And then, I come back, and then, I feel really motivated. I'm writing a lot, and I go ahead and I write all of this over here on my paper. And so I end up with something like this. I'm not going to go ahead and read it, but you guys get the point. And then let's say after I proofread the second and the third paragraph, I really didn't like it, and I wanted to completely get rid of it, and that's what I did. So I got rid of it. So this is the stuff that I got rid of, and then this is over here the stuff that I changed. So I completely got rid of it, and I added this stuff over here. And then, okay, so I ended up with a version that looks like this. And then, I did some more adjusting. I added some other things. And then finally, I end up with a paper that looks like this. But what if once I read this paper and I'm like, oh man, I really like that previous version, this version over here. this one. I really like this previous version. I really want to go back to it. Well, at this point, there's really no way I can go back to it. I would probably just have to rewrite this paper, and I have to remember exactly what I wrote back then. There's really no way I can go back to it. And this highlights the significance of a version control system like Git. So let's go through this exact example, but this time using a version control system. So, okay, so the first thing is, okay, so I wrote the title as well as the first sentence. And so over here, I saved a version, v1, and I gave it a title and a first sentence. I give it a title and first sentence. So that right there is the first version. And then what I did was I then went ahead and I updated the first sentence, so I gave it a second version. And currently I am on the second version, so this white circle highlights exactly what I'm on. And then, okay, I added a few more paragraphs, so now I'm in version 3. So over here I gave it a title of added front end and testing paragraph. And then I went ahead and I updated some things. And then I went ahead and I updated some things some more. And you can see right now I'm on version 5. And at this point, remember, I didn't like this paper and I wanted to go back to version 3. Well, before I wasn't able to do that because I wasn't keeping track of my file changes. I wasn't keeping track of my versions. But now, very easily, I can just flip to version 3. I'm like, okay, yeah, I like this better. Now, if I want to, I can also flip to version 1, version 4, version whatever. So I can kind of flip back and forth to whatever version I want. And that right there is the power of Git. What it does is it tracks our changes and it saves different versions. Now, if we ultimately don't like the version that we're at right now, we can always go back to a previous version. So let's kind of look at a more coding example. So let's say that you are a front-end developer. Now, Git applies to absolutely everybody. If you're a database engineer, if you're a data scientist, or if you're a backend engineer, it doesn't matter. It applies to everybody, but I'm just going to illustrate this through front end because it's most visual. So let's say that you are building a website and you created a nav bar. So you can see here on this website, we have this nav bar. And so you can say that the version 1 is added a nav bar. And then you create another version, and this version right here is the hero. So you created a hero, that's v2. And then you created an about page, so you can see that's v3. And then let's say you went ahead and you split the about page. You don't really like how it looked like this, so you created another version and you went ahead and split it. But then, looking at this website, you're not particularly happy with it. And you're like, you know what, I really don't like the about. I want to make some changes to the hero. I don't know what to do, blah, blah, blah. You're like, okay, actually, no, I do know what to do. I'm just going to go back to v2. This is where I added the hero. And thus, if I go back to v2, then I go back to this version where I just have the nav and the hero. And then from this version, I can actually create another branch. So I can create another branch. And we'll talk about branches later. But I can create another version over here, v5. So over here, I changed the hero. And then I added an about page with three sections. And you can see, okay, I'm happy with this. But what if I wanted to compare them? Then I can, of course, just flip back and forth between versions. And that right there, again, is the power of Git. And Git is an absolute must if you're a developer. And it doesn't matter what developer you are. It is an absolute must for keeping track of your changes and also working with large teams. So we're going to get to that in great detail in the future sections. But right now, hopefully this illustrates what Git is and its importance. In order to start working with Git, we of course need to download it on our local machine. And thankfully, whether you're on Mac or Windows, the download process is really easy. So let's go ahead and let's download Git. So to download Git, just go to Google and just search for Git. And let me just go ahead and just zoom in here. You can just search for Git and then just go to the very first thing that you see. So git/scm.com. Go over here and you should be at this page. Now over here, whatever operating system you are, you should see some sort of pop-up saying download for your operating system. I am on Mac, so it says download for Mac. So I'm going to show you how to download for Mac, and I'm also going to quickly show you how to download for Windows. They are a little bit different, however, they're both really easy. So I don't think there's going to be too much difficulty. So let's go over here, click on download for Mac, and it takes you to a bunch of options. So you can see here, you can either download through Homebrew, or you can download Xcode, which also downloads Git for you. And over here, we have some other options. I think the best option is to go ahead and just use Homebrew. Now, of course, if you want to use Homebrew, you need to have Homebrew on your local machine. So if you don't have Homebrew on your local machine, just go click over here and it takes you to the Homebrew website. And then all you have to do is copy this command. So just click this copy command, go to your terminal. So open up a terminal. To open up a terminal, all you have to do is just click search terminal, and it takes this terminal over here. It takes you over here. And then all you got to do is just go ahead and paste. So go ahead and paste this, and then this would install Homebrew on your machine. Now this command does take a very long time. I'm not gonna lie, so I already executed it. But once you execute it, you should be able to write brew, and you should see a bunch of options. So you shouldn't get an error. You should see some options over here. Let me just zoom in here. And then if you get these options, then you know you downloaded Homebrew successfully. Now, once you download Homebrew, then you can go back to the Git and you can just do brew install Git. So you can go ahead over here and just do brew install Git. Again, this takes some time, so I already did that. But to test that you have Git on your local machine, what you can do is just say Git. And if you get all of these options, git clone, git init, and all these descriptions, we're gonna go through a lot of these, do not worry. That means you have Git installed on your local machine. And really the same thing applies for Windows users. So if you are on Windows, just go over here to Windows build. You're probably going to have a different pop-up saying download for Windows. And if you were to click on it, it's just going to automatically download whatever version you need. Over here, you can also pick whatever version you want. And then you would just have to go through just some sort of wizard and just click next, next, next. And there you go. You have Git installed. And to double check, you can just go open up a terminal, just say Git. And then if you see all these commands, that means you have Git installed. So Git is a very easy download. Hopefully that was a relatively smooth process. In the next sections, we're going to be talking about some of these Git commands. All right, my good friends, in this section, we will be introducing our very first Git command. And that command is Git Init. So let's talk about what Git Init is. So let's remember, Git is a version control system. What it does is it tracks our files changes and it creates versions. And it allows us to hop between versions. So let's say that we have a bunch of folders. So we have a bunch of folders, and within these folders we have a bunch of files. And we want to use Git to track the changes and to create versions. Well, right out of the box, Git is not going to be doing that tracking. You can't use Git when you create a fresh directory. What you have to do is initialize a Git project, a Git repo. So I would go to this directory and say, hey, I want to use Git here. Maybe I don't want to use Git here. Maybe I don't want to use Git here. But then maybe I also want to use Git here. So I would go to these directories and initialize a Git repository. And because of that, now I can use Git to version control any files changes within these two directories. And over here, well, I don't have Git because I didn't initialize the project. And you can guess, to initialize a project, all we have to do is this command over here, Git Init, which is Git initialize for short. So let's actually get into it and let's do it right now. So let's go over here and I'm just going to open up my terminal. So open up your terminal. I'm just going to quickly clear Let's do cd dot dot, cd dot dot. Let's go over here. Let me just zoom out a little bit. There we go. Let's just clear. Okay, there we go. So now I am on my desktop. So you can see here that I'm on my desktop. And what I want to do is I want to initialize a project with Git. But first I want to create a project. So let's just go here and let's just create a project. So I'm going to say, I don't know what to call this project. I'm just going to say Git project. So over here, I'm going to say Git project. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to move into that project. So I'm going to do cd. So cd is how you move into another directory. And I'm going to say Git project. So right now I am inside of that project. And if I were to open this project up, let me just zoom in here. I guess I can't zoom in, unfortunately. If I open the project up, you cannot see anything inside it, which makes sense. Now, once we're inside the project in our terminal, what we can do now is Git Init. And if we were to enter, you can see here that it has initialized empty Git repository inside of, well, this directory right here. So user, lathe harb, desktop, Git project, and then what it created is this .git file. And this is what is going to be used to track our changes. So this is what we need to initialize a Git repository. And so if I were to go back over here, you can see that I have this .git folder. So it's not a file, so rather it's a folder. Now this is a hidden folder, so you might not see it. To see it on Mac, it'd be Command Shift dot. So I removed it. But if you do Command Shift dot, you can see all of the hidden folders. I'm not sure what it is on Windows. Maybe you guys can quickly do a Google search and figure it out. But trust me, if you get this over here, it is there. It just might be hidden. So that is pretty much it. So we have just initialized a Git repository. And now we can utilize Git to track any changes within this folder. If we're outside of the folder, then it's not going to work because we didn't initialize our Git repo there. We initialized it right over here. So yeah, so that is pretty much it. And that is the very, very first command. Now that we have initialized our Git repository, we're going to talk about a very important concept known as committing. And this is pretty much the core of Git. You really can't use Git if you don't know how to commit code. Now let me explain what I mean by committing. So remember we went through this diagram, just so I can explain to you the importance of a version control system like Git. Now over here what we did was we created a navbar and then we created a version and gave that version a title of added a navbar. And whenever we made more changes, for example, if we created our hero, we created a separate version, and then over here we also created a separate version for the about, and then we also split the about. So remember, we created all these versions, and we can always hop back between versions. Now, how are we going to create those versions? Well, we're going to create those versions by committing changes. So that is the premise of commits. We are going to get our changes. So for example, over here, we added the navbar, and then let's say we went ahead and we added the hero. Well, we're going to get all of the changes regarding to creating that hero component and commit those changes. And that is going to create a version for us. And same thing over here. We're going to get all of the changes regarding creating the about, because there might be quite a bit of file changes, and we're going to commit that. So for this section, for committing, we're actually going to learn quite a few commands. We're going to learn git status, git add, and git commit. And all these commands are vital for you to learn if you want to use Git professionally. Now, you might know what git commit is doing. It's going to be committing a bunch of changes to create a version. But you might be wondering, what in the world is git status? What in the world is git add? Well, let me explain to you the process that it takes to actually commit and create that version. So I'm going to just show you this example over here. So right here, we have our saved changes. So this is inside of our actual directory, our working directory. We have a bunch of these files, and we made changes to these files, and right now they're changed. They are our saved changes. Now let's say what we want to do is we want to commit this changes. Well, first of all, we have to tell Git exactly what we want to commit, because we actually don't want to commit everything all at once. What we probably want to do is just commit the navbar first, then the hero, and then the about, so we can create these versions over here. So the first thing that we have to do, again, is tell Git what we have to commit. Well, we can tell Git what we want to commit by adding it to the staging area. And this is exactly where git add comes to place. So we're going to add this file to the staging area. So again, we want to commit this navbar. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and add it in the staging area. And then once we added everything we want to commit inside of our staging area, we go ahead and we commit it, and Git is going to create that version for us. Now let's actually go on. You might be thinking, okay, why can't I just do git commit whatever file that I want? Well, we might want to commit multiple files, not just one file. For example, let's say we went ahead, we committed this. So now it's not in our saved changes because we already committed it. But now we want to commit our hero. So what we can do is move the hero to the staging environment through git add, and I'll show you exactly how we're going to do this in an actual example. Don't worry about that. But then let's say we went ahead and we made more changes. So let's say we created another file that pertains to the hero, and we made some changes there by creating the file that within itself is a change. And let's say that this is maybe an HTML file and this is a CSS file. Well, what we want to do is we want to commit both of these together. So what I'm going to do is also move this to the staging area. And then once I'm satisfied that this is what I want to commit, I'm going to move both to commit, and then I'm going to commit it. And then all is left is the about. I can also move that to staging and create those versions. So that right there is the premise of committing code. That is the process. Now you might be thinking, okay, well, I understand what git commit is. I understand what git add is. But now what is git status? Well, git status is just a tool that we can use to see where our files are at. So for example, if we are in this state over here, we can just do git status, and it's going to tell us that both these hero files are inside of our staging layer over here. So it's in our staging layer. And let's say now that this is how our files look. If we did git status, it's going to tell us that these two files are not in staging, while this one is. All right, cool. So that is pretty much the conceptual overview. I hope that made sense. But now let's actually go through an example. Now to go through an example, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open this up in an IDE. And the most popular IDE by far is Visual Studio Code. So that is what I am going to be using. If you don't have Visual Studio Code, I highly suggest that you go ahead and install it, because it actually has a lot of really cool Git features within it. Now you can use whatever IDE you want, that's fine. But again, I highly suggest VS Code because it really shows you how your files are being moved from save to staging to commit. It has a really good user interface. But again, you can use whatever it is that you want, but I recommend VS Code. I feel like I'm just talking in circles here. So go ahead, and if you don't have VS Code, install it or use whatever IDE you want. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to go over here. I'm just going to search for VS Code. I'm going to search for VS Code. Hopefully this doesn't open up anything I don't want it to. There we go. Yes, it does. So let's quickly... I wasn't able to hide everything in time, so what I did off screen was I just opened up VS Code, and using VS Code, I opened it up in this directory. Now remember, the Git project is a directory that we created right over here inside of our desktop, and it was initialized with a Git repo. All right, cool. So now let's go through the flow. Now to do this, what I'm going to be doing is using the integrated VS Code terminal. So let's go ahead and let's open that up, and I'm just going to zoom in a little bit just for you guys. And okay, cool. So now we have our Git project right over here. And so now let's say I want to create a new file. Now actually before I do that, let's just write git status just to see the status of our current application. Now you can see here the status saying, hey, there is nothing to commit. The working tree is clean. So that is the current status of our repository, of our application. So now let's go over here and let's create an about.html. Or actually, you know what? Let's make this a nav.html. You don't need to know HTML. That's fine. It's just a it's just what I'm going to be using, for example. And what we can do is we can do just the command exclamation mark, and then we can get just a boilerplate HTML. So let me just do that and let me save it. So now what I want to do is let's just write git status again. We want to see the status of our application. If you guys hear my cat, please bear with me. He's being a little bit silly right now. Okay, so he's about to jump, so you guys are might hear some stuff. Okay, there we go. Now I think he's gonna calm down. All right, so now let's just do git status. So you can see here, this is untracked files. So these are changes that we made. And you can see right here that we have nav.html. So let's go ahead and let's commit this change. So let's go over here. And now what we can do is first, of course, we have to add this to the staging area. So remember over here, if I went back to the example, we have our files changed, then we have to move it to staging, and then we can commit it. So let's go over here, and now what we can do is we can do git add, and then we can say, okay, well, which file or folder do we want to add to the staging area? Well, I'm going to say nav.html. And now, if I were to do that, well, that has just been added to the staging area. So let's look at the status of our current application right now. If I were to do git status, you can see here that these are the changes that are going to be committed. So you can see here, changes to be committed. This is inside of our staging area. Now what we want to do is we want to commit these changes. So now we can do git commit. And then we have to give that commit a message. Remember, let's go back all the way over here. Remember, for each commit, we gave it a message detailing what we did. So you can see here, added a navbar, added a hero, and then added an about. So now let's go back over here. We have to give this commit a message detailing the file's changes that we did. So to provide the message, we do -m, and then we provide it with a string, and within that string is going to be the message. I'll talk about exactly how I prefer to do to write messages or write commits a little bit later, but for now, just look at how I do it. It's fine. So what I like to do is I'm going to say feature, and then colon, and I'm going to say add nav bar boilerplate, because we just added the nav bar boilerplate. So if I were to commit this, now it has been committed. So now if I were to do git status, you can see that there is nothing on the working tree. We have committed these changes. Now, we don't have to just create a new file for it to be tracked. We can also change an existing file. So over here, if I were to go to the body, maybe I were to add an h1, just saying navbar. This is I'm not going to code out a navbar, but I'm just going to show you guys an example. Now, if we were to do git status again, you can see that we have this modified, and of course now we can go through the same exact step. We can do git add, and then we can go navbar.html. We can add that in there, and then what we can do is we can commit those changes. So git commit -m, and then we can say this is going to be a feature, add header to navbar, as my cat is meowing consistently. Add header to navbar. So now we're going to commit this. All right, so it is committed. And now if I were to do git status, well, it's now we have an empty working tree. So now what I want to do is I also want to show you how we can use Visual Studio Code. Now, if you're not using Visual Studio Code, feel free to I guess skip this section. It's totally fine, but Visual Studio Code is really handy when it comes to this stuff. So over here, to check out our current status, what we can do over here is go to this right here, source control. And you can see that right now we have no changes. So let's say I want to change this from navbar to our actual company logo. And let's say the company logo is Lion Eats. I don't know, it's just a random thing that came to mind. Now you can see here that Visual Studio Code is tracking the changes. And what we can do is we can actually click on this and we can see these changes. So it used to be this, but now it's this. So it's really neat. We can actually look at our changes. And now if we want to commit it, we can actually commit it, or we can add it to the staging through multiple different options. So what we can do is we can just say git and then git add nav.html. So we've seen this before. So we've seen this before over here. So now what it did actually is it moved it from changes to staged changes. So you can see that it is in staged changes now. All right, cool. So you can see that it did that. Now, another thing that we can do is we can actually move this change. So we can move this change from staged changes by actually clicking on this minus right over here. So we can click on this minus, and now this is back to the changes. Now, also, we don't have to go ahead and write git add every time using the integrated, using Visual Studio Code. We can just go over here and we can say that we want to add this file to staging. And there we go. We have just added this file to staging. And if I were to do a git status, you can see that it has been modified and it has, or sorry, the changes modification, but now it is in staging. And also you can go ahead and commit this if you want, or in Visual Studio Code, what you can do is go over here and just enter a commit message. So you can see here, let's just say feature, and we're gonna say change title to company name or something like that. And then what we can do is we can click on this, and now this has been committed. All right, that is pretty cool. Now, one last thing that I want to show you is that, of course, we can stage multiple files. In fact, let's just go over here and let's just create a navbar.css as well as a navbar.javascript. Okay, so now we have, if I go over here, I should have two changes. Now, let's say I also worked a little bit on the HTML. Maybe I give it a class. Okay. Yeah, you can't work when you're comparing code. If I go over to HTML, I can go to a class. Maybe I already give this a class of nav, and maybe I already give it a script, blah, blah, blah. And let's say what I want to do is I want to add all of these changes. So what I could do is I could do git add, and then I can say nav.js, nav.html, nav.css, and this would totally add everything to staging. Now let me just click minus over here, because I want to get it out of staging. Or what I could do if I want to add every single change that I made into staging, then what I can do is simply git add dot. So dot is every single file, every single folder that is changed, added to the staging area. So what we can do over here, you can see that that moves it over there. And then over here, we can commit this. We can do git commit. And then we can say, I'm going to say feature, colon, and then I'm going to say add CSS and JS. I'm going to say add navbar, CSS, and JS. I'm going to go ahead and commit this, and there we go. Now it is committed. So that right there is the premise of Git status, Git add, and Git commit. And this is pretty much the core fundamentals of Git, and you absolutely need to understand it if you want to use Git. And hopefully my explanation was a good one, and now you guys understand exactly what's going on. Alright, my good friends, in this section we are going to be learning a very, very important concept known as Git Ignore. And what this is a file that allows us to ignore certain things inside of our Git repository. And there's a lot of good reasons why we would want to do this. Now, before getting into it, what I want to quickly note is that, okay, we can add files in, but when I wanted to remove them from staging, all I did was I just did this minus sign over here, which is built in with VS Code. You can also do that through the command line interface. So you can do git, and then you would do git reset, and then head, and then dash dash, and then the path to this file. So this is going to be, we're in the root directory right now, so it would be just nav.html, and that would move it to back to staging over here. And now if I were to do a git status, we would see it over here. Now you can see that was kind of an annoying command, so I like to just use this. That's why I really like to use VS Code. But nonetheless, let's get into it. Let's talk about Git Ignore. So let's say that we are creating our nav and we realize that we need to store environment variables. And typically environment variables are stored in a .env file. And if you don't know what environment variables are, you can just think of them as key value pairs that are relatively secret. So I can say something like, I don't know, auth token, and I can say that this auth token is equal to whatever. Let's just say this. I'm just gonna do that, and then I would be able to access this environment variable inside of my JavaScript. I would be able to do something like const, I don't know, token is equal to process.env.auth token. Now, one thing is I probably don't want to commit this over here. Maybe I want to commit this over here, as well as what other changes did I make? This over here as well. Maybe I want to commit these changes, but I'm not going to want to commit the .env because this is very secretive, and I want it just to be within my computer, within my local machine. I don't want to commit it so people can see that within that version. So what could I do? Well, I could selectively pick that I want to just commit these things and not the .env. But what I can also do to add a extra layer of security is tell Git specifically, I never want you to track these changes. So you can see right now, if I were to do a git status, you can see here that we have all these changed files, including the .env. So now what I can do here instead is say .git ignore, so .git ignore, and then in here I can specify any files or folders that I want to ignore. So I want you to just watch for this right now. So watch the .env, and I'm going to over here put .env, and I'm going to save it. And you can see that the color changed a little bit. So you can see here, if I were to save that again, you can see now it's kind of a brighter white. If I were to put it in the .env, it has changed. And now if I were to do git status, you can see that the .env is not within there itself. Now, if you want, you can also ignore the .ignore. That is also a possibility. So let's see if we can do that. .ignore. If you don't want to commit that, you can also ignore that. And now you can see here, git status, we only have these things over here. So that is the importance of git ignore. It allows us to ignore some files that we probably do not want to commit. Now let's just go ahead. Let's just go through the practice round. Let's just do git add. We're going to do git add dot, and we're just going to go ahead and we're going to commit this. We're going to say, I don't know, feature played. I don't know. This is going to be a bad commit. Add environment, add auth token, whatever. That's going to be the commit. I'm going to go over here and do git, well, no, not git push. That's pretty much it. We'll talk about git push a little bit later. Don't worry. In this section, we are not going to introduce any new concepts. I'm just going to talk about exactly what you should be committing. Now, there is a rule in Git of keeping your commits atomic. Now, what does that mean? Well, that means that your commit should just encompass one single feature. You shouldn't commit multiple features. So for example, I'm going to go all the way back over here. So let's say you created your nav bar. Well, that right there is one feature. You want to go ahead and commit that. Now, what you don't want to do is create your nav bar and then also create your hero and then also create your about and then just commit those all together. That is something you don't want to do. You want to, again, keep your commits atomic. They should really just encompass one single feature, one single thing. So that is what is meant by an atomic commit. So again, let's just go through a quick example. So let's say over here, I also created an about.html, and I also made, let's just create the HTML template. And then, oh my goodness. Okay, I created an about.html, and then over here I also modified my nav.css. Over here I'm just going to give it a style of, I don't know, background color of aqua. So now what I want to do is I absolutely do not want to commit both the about.html and then the nav.css because they're two separate features. Again, we want to make our commits atomic. So to do that, what we would do is instead we would just add nav.css. So we would go ahead and add nav.css and we would commit that, and then we would commit about.html. Now also another thing I want to talk about in this section is naming commits. So it is actually a common convention and recommended by Git to always use present tense. And it seems a little bit counterintuitive because, okay, maybe if I wanted to commit this over here, let's just go ahead and double check that I added it. So if I were to do git status, you can see that I added nav.css. It would be kind of intuitive to do git commit-m and then say added nav styles. So added nav styles, and there's nothing wrong with that. This would work completely, but it's actually recommended to keep everything in a present tense. So instead of added nav styles, you would say add nav styles. Now, one thing I also really like to do to really keep my commits organized is to flag my commit somehow. So I'm going to say that this maybe is a style change. So maybe I can say style and then colon and then my commit message. So you can see here that this is how I like to organize it. And that flag really can be whatever it is that you want. A common flags that I do is feature, so maybe I'm adding a feature, and then another common flag is bug or fix. Honestly, you can just use whatever flag that you want. It doesn't really matter. You don't even have to use a flag. It's just a way that I like to organize my commits so I can understand them a lot better. So I like to do style. So I changed over here. I'm flagging this as style. And then over here I'm saying add nav styles. So I'm going to go ahead and commit this. Now let's do the exact same thing with the about.html. So we can say over here, we added that. Now I can say over here, commit. And I can say this is a feature. And then I can say add, again in present tense, add about boilerplate. Really, there's a lot of argument between how you should actually message your commits. This is my common convention, and this is the common convention that I use in my company. But really, this really depends on your personal preference and the personal preference of the place that you work for. There's a lot of companies that have standards for how you should name your commits. And the way that I name my commit might not apply to that company. Maybe they have different standards. And actually, there's certain features that companies use that actually track the convention, how you're actually committing, to make sure that you're following their convention. But this is again how I personally like to do it. I just want to highlight it. But again, the concept of keeping your commits atomic is universal. That should be very ingrained in your head. You just want to commit a single feature. Now, the way that you actually message that commit is going to be different regarding your personal preference or regarding your company. So I hope that made sense, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Alright, the time that you guys have been waiting for. In this section, we are going to introduce GitHub. Now, what is GitHub? Well, GitHub is a place where we can actually store our repositories. So let's just go over here, and if you don't have a GitHub account, go ahead and create it. It's relatively easy, and you should be shown in this page over here. Now what I can do is I can go over here to my repositories, and these are all of my Git repositories. So let me just zoom in here a little bit. You can see here I have an Instagram clone. Let's just go take a look at this. So you can see I have a client, database, middleware, and you can actually go over here to see all of the commits that I have made. So these are all of the commits. I wasn't really following the naming convention that I do now when I was doing this. This was back in 2020, which is around a year ago. And you can, of course, see the commits. You can see a bunch of different things. So this is where we can store our Git repository. So we created this over here. We created this repo. Let's actually store it inside of the cloud, because ultimately what we don't want to do is have it inside of our local machine, because something may happen to our local machine. It may get stolen, or it may get damaged, and the files within it might get lost. Now, ultimately, what we might want to do instead is get those files and store them over here on GitHub, which stores it in the cloud, so that now what we can do is, regardless of what machine it is, our repo is always going to be in here. Another reason why we want to put our repos inside of GitHub is because that is what is probably going to be used as your source code when deploying your application. So if you were to deploy your application in some sort of EC2 instance, for example, in AWS or whatever, it needs to know the code, and it's probably not going to get that code from your local machine. It's probably going to get that code from GitHub. So you want to, again, push that code onto GitHub. Alright, cool. So that is pretty much it as an introduction to GitHub. So now what we want to do is this repo that we have created over here, we want to get it on GitHub. Now, one thing that I want to note is GitHub is not the only place where you can store your repositories. There's many out there. There's also GitLab, which is very popular, and there's also things like Bitbucket, etc. But by far, GitHub is the most popular and most commonly used, and it was actually bought out by Microsoft, so it is maintained by a very, very large company. All right, okay, so let's go ahead and let's create our very first repo. So to create a repo, what you can do is you can just go over here to your repositories, and then what you can do is you can just click on new. So you can click on new. And then over here, let's just call this nav bar. I don't know what this thing, I guess this thing is Lion Eats. That's the company that we're creating. You can also give it a description. We can also say that we either want this to be public or private. Public, it is accessible to everybody. Private is only accessible to yourself and any other people that you want it to be accessible to. So you can actually add people within here. I'm gonna make this private, actually. Why not? You can also add a README. We'll talk about that later. You can also add a Git Ignore. Well, I already did that. Over here, I have Travis. We're not going to talk about continuous integration. So that's fine. All right, cool. So now what we can do is we can create our repository. And ultimately what we get is this. So we get a bunch of instructions. So what is going on here? Well, now what we need to do is we need to get these files over here into this repo. And these commands over here are the steps that you need to take to get there. So there's actually two different approaches that you can take. So if you do not have a Git repository, this is the steps that you would take. So you would Git Init, initialize a Git repository. Then you would do a Git add. You would add whatever it is that you need. Then you would commit. And then what you would do is you would do git branch dash m main. This is saying the main branch. We're not going to talk about branches in this video, so just copy it. In another video, we're going to talk about collaborative Git, and that's when we're going to introduce branching. But now for creating a Git repo, really all you have to do is just copy these things and paste them inside of your terminal, and it would just put this repo inside of here. So yeah, so then we have git remote at origin. This is just saying that, hey, we want to link it to this repo right over here. And then we have git push -u origin main. So again, we'll talk about this. This is if you don't have a Git repo already initialized. In this case, we do. So what we can do is instead is just skip a lot of these steps, just do these 3 over here. So if you don't have a Git repo initialized, again, go with these steps. But if you do, then go with these steps. Now, if you went ahead and actually tried to do this, especially if you are brand new to Git and GitHub and you haven't, this is your very first GitHub account, it is actually not going to work. Or actually, it will work, but it is going to ask you for a username and password. Now, ultimately, what we want to do is we want to tell GitHub that anything that we push from our local machine is acceptable. Because right now, what's happening is what we're going to try to do is we're going to go ahead and try to push these changes from our machine, I'm on a Mac, into GitHub. Now, GitHub needs to know that, hey, I am the owner of this computer and I am the owner of this GitHub account. It doesn't want just anybody to push code into my GitHub repo. So imagine you created a GitHub repo and then I went ahead and I pushed code into it with my machine. That's not good. We need to somehow tell GitHub that anytime that we push code from my local machine, it's okay. This is me. This is who I am. So what we need to do is somehow communicate between my local machine and GitHub. And the way that we communicate between 2 machines is through SSH. So that is what we are going to configure right now. You don't really have to know what SSH is. Actually, setting up SSH keys is really easy. But SSH, again, is a way that we can communicate between 2 different machines. So let's actually just go through the steps of setting up SSH, and then what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and push this repo, push this repository onto GitHub. So let's go over here, and the best thing that I like to do when I create, not Game of Thrones, the best thing that I like to do when I create a brand new GitHub account is just do GitHub SSH. And over here, there's a really good documentation that you're going to follow. I'm actually not going to really explain what these commands are doing because they're actually a little bit confusing and outside the scope of this crash course. Really just copy and paste these commands and you should be okay. So over here, you can learn about SSH protocol. Again, this is a way that you can communicate between your machine and GitHub. And now what you want to do over here is first check if you have an existing SSH. In this case, I actually do have an existing SSH. So what you can do is you can click on this, and then over here you can do this command. So over here you can do this command right here, and these commands might be different if you are on Windows. So watch out. I would actually recommend opening up Git Bash or something like that to do this, so you can get all of these commands. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my terminal, and I'm going to go over here, and I'm just going to zoom in a little bit. I'm going to do yes here, and I'm just going to do ls this, and you can see that I have a bunch of these files. So yes, I do have SSH. You can see I have all these files over here, so I do have SSH indeed, and these are the files that they're talking about, these ones. All right, so I'm just going to generate a new one with you guys as well. So if we want to generate a new one, what we want to do is we want to do this. So let's just write this command over here. So we're going to do this command. Oopsie. Let's go over here. And then over here, put your GitHub email address. So I'm not going to put mine, but this is what you would do. I'm actually not going to execute these commands, but do that first. And then what you are going to do is then you want to generate your key. So you want to go ahead and you want to generate your key. And what it's going to show you is, hey, I want, you know what, let's just go through this together. Let us go here. I'm just going to do example at example.com, and it's going to say generating your key. And now what it's going to say is, where do you want it saved? I'm going to just save it right over here. So this is where I am going to save it. So just initial, so you can just do enter. And now what you can do is you can add a passphrase. So each time you can commit, you have to insert this passphrase. If you don't want to enter this passphrase when you want to commit something, then all you have to do, or rather not commit something, actually push it to GitHub. All you have to do is just leave it empty for no passphrase. And I honestly prefer having no passphrase because it can get pretty annoying. And as you can see here, what it does, if you get this kind of wacky looking thing, it says that it has generated the key. All right, so that is pretty much it. So now what we want to do is we want to add this SSH key to our SSH agent. So to do that, all we're going to do is we're going to copy this command. Again, this is just a bunch of copy pasting. So we're going to go over here. We're going to copy paste. And then what we are going to do is we are going to open this config file over here. So if you don't have this config file, then you're going to have to execute this command over here. And then what you can do is you can actually just copy this over here and paste it inside of that SSH file. So SSH /config. I'm not going to do that, but again, if you don't have this file over here, just do touch, and that will create the file, and then you can open it. But if you do have it, you can just open it. And then copy and paste this command and put it in there. All right, so that is pretty much it. That is all that is. Now over here, you can also do this command over here. So let's just execute that. And then we will enter that. Terrific. Now what we want to do is we want to add this SSH account to our GitHub page. So now what we can do is we want to copy the SSH key. This key is what is going to be used to communicate between our machine and GitHub. To do that, if you followed everything correctly, you can just copy this, paste that in there. And now what this should do is copy that SSH key to your clipboard. So now if you want, what you can do is you can go over here to your profile. So go to your profile. Not your profile, sorry. You want to go to your settings. And then within your settings, what you want to do is you want to go to SSH. And then over here, you can see all of the SSH. What you can do is you can create a new SSH key. You can call this your computer. I'm going to say Mac, and then paste your SSH key in there. So you can see here that I'm pasting it. I guess now you guys know what my email is, which is fine, whatever, I don't care. And now you can add that SSH key within it. All right, cool. And I'm not going to do that because I already did that, but now we have communication between our GitHub account and our machine. So now what we can do is just go back to our repository. So remember the repo that we have created. So let's go to your profile. Over here, I'm going to go to my repositories. And remember, we created this lines eat repository. And now what we can do is we can follow this command. So remember, we already initialized everything. So now what we can do is we can do this. So we can paste that in there. And then let's paste this in there. And then we can paste this in there. And I'm going to have another crash course on collaborative Git. And this is where we're going to introduce GitHub and Git in actually a lot more detail. This is going to be more so with working with teams. So now we can go ahead and we can add that. You can see that something happened. And now if I were to refresh, you can see that we have added our repository to GitHub. So we added this repo to GitHub, which is terrific. Exactly what we wanted. And now let's just do some committing. So you can see inside of our repo, we actually don't have the .env or the .git ignore because we decided to ignore these. No matter what changes we made, they're not going to be in there. And this is exactly precisely why we need a git ignore. This is going to be inside of the cloud, and it could be accessible to some malicious person. Now, again, you could just make this private, but if it was accessible to some malicious person, then maybe that person can take those tokens and do some bad things. So maybe, again, we want to just keep this inside of our local machine instead. This is a lot better approach. So let's just go through this process over here. Now I just want to quickly introduce, you can see here there's this number 8. Let me just zoom out. You can see that these are 8 commits. So if we were to click on them, you can see all of our commits. So you can see here, this is the commit. You can actually click on this to see the files that were changed. So over here, you can see that we added this. And then maybe let's say change the title of the company. You can see here that we changed from navbar to Lions Eat. So you can actually see all of the different versions that you have over here that you have created. So these are all of your commits. And remember, each of my commits are nice and atomic, and they're using this common convention for naming these commit messages. All right, cool. So let's just go through the process of creating a commit and then pushing it onto GitHub. So let's say now that we also want to create the hero.html. And so let's just save that. Let's also create a hero.js. Let's create that. And let's go over here and then let's just say git add dot just to add everything. Let's do git status to see what's going on here. So you can see here that what happened to our git, what happened to our hero.js. Let's add that in there as well. Oh, we created a folder called hero.js. Oops, not what I wanted to do. So let's go here. Let's do hero.js. And now we have a hero.js. Cool. So let's just go here. Let's do add. Let's do git commit. We're going to say feature. We're going to say add hero boilerplate, whatever. And now we have committed this. And now let's say we are satisfied with this and we want to push it on to GitHub. Well, to do that, a very, very easy command, git push. That's it. Git push. We already created the link between this repo on our local machine to this repo on GitHub. So it already knows that link. Now all we have to do is just do a git push. And then if I were to refresh this, you can see that I can see that commit that was committed 31 seconds ago. And if I were to go to Lions Eat, you can see here that we have the hero. Now let's just do one more for practice. So let's say I want to organize my files. So I can say hero. I can put that in this directory over here. So let's just put the hero, all the hero stuff in a hero directory. Let's put the about in an about directory. And then let's put the nav inside of a nav directory. So let's just move that over here. And there we go. All right, so now we have organized everything, which is terrific. Let's just do git status just to see all of the changes. So you can see here that we have a lot of changes. We actually deleted some of this stuff. And we didn't really delete them. We moved them from directories, but for Git, it sees that we have deleted them because they're not in the initial spot that they were in before. Now they're in a subdirectory. But now you can see here that we have added these folders, and now in these folders we have some of these files over here that we added. All right, cool. So now we can just do git add dot, git commit, and I can just say, I don't know, cleanup or refactor or whatever you want to call it. Cleanup, and I'm just going to say add files to directories. I think we do sub dash directories. So let's commit this, and we are going to push this. And now, again, if we go over here and we were to refresh our changes, you can see that it has immediately changed. And we can also see our wonderful commit. Yeah, so that is pretty much it. I hope that really introduces Git and GitHub for you. There's still so much more to learn, but for this video, I'm just going to introduce the basics. In the next videos about GitHub, I'm not sure when that's going to be. I'm going to talk about collaborative Git and how you can use the powers of Git and GitHub to collaborate with multiple teams. All right, cool.